All right. Hi, everybody. We're back, still going at it. And good to finally have this kind of topic in Liminal, because we had a couple of years now with the pandemic amplifying, essentially, a lot of the troubles that were just dormant or less visible in society. And so divisions and oppressions kind of came to the fore as people had a little bit more time both to observe from the quiet limbo of their homes and also had a little time to express. And I have a very, very special friend of Liminal here, Carla Fernandes.
Hello.
I'm going to give you a hug.
Okay. Thank you. I'll take it.
Carla produced a really cool episode for the Boom Podquest, the Liminal Podquest, during the pandemic when we wanted to continue connecting to boomers and others. And she put together a really great session exploring racial justice today. And we thought it would be really important to showcase the work of people living and working in Portugal and the way they approach the topic of essentially oneness and our journey towards it. Because like we said in our intro, we like to say we are one, but in practice, are we? Are we walking that walk? Are we doing that? Are we confronting the difficulties that it takes in daily practice to reverse and undo and heal the shitty situations of the past that we've inherited? And I'm gonna just leave you in the capable hands of Carla, who's already a seasoned artist, curator, podcaster, has been producing the amazing Radio Afrolink. That I'll let you tell you about it.
No,
but,
let me do that. It's nice to listen to
right,
good
okay,
stuff about yourself.
yeah. Okay, keep going. Yeah, I mean, she started essentially creating space for people who didn't have space to voice their lives, the questions of their being, the oppressions on their bodies, on their minds, from systemic situations they find themselves in, and the injustices that come with that. So it's refreshing when somebody sees what's missing in the landscape of information and misinformation and does something to open up a space so that others can be channeled through it. Their lives, their ideas, their dreams, their fears, all of it, including a lot of beautiful things and a lot of heavy, challenging, harsh things. Most recently, taking an inquiry and a tangent on exploring police oppression and brutality and violence faced by any kind of racialized minority in Portugal specifically, but these stories we know are everywhere around the world. So yeah, it's really incredible to be here after a couple of years of just working together digitally, and now physical contact. So yeah, I'm gonna let Carla kind of take over and introduce our wonderful speakers, and stick around, enjoy, and you can ask some questions later.
I'm going to give you another hug. Thank you so much.
I'm feeling jealous.
Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation.
Give them a little, show them a little love.
Thank you. It's very beautiful to be here today, and as Ivan said, to talk about these topics. This wouldn't be the setting that I would expect to talk about this topic, prejudice of mine. But I am glad to be able to do so today, and especially with these two guests, Paula Cardoso and Virgilio Varela. This is the moment where I have to read their bios so that I don't get anything wrong. So I'm going to give you some info. So Paula Cardoso, she's the founder of Afrolink, a digital platform promoting Black people's representation and visibility in Portugal. She created also a market for Black entrepreneurs and is also the author of Força Africana. This is a series of children's books featuring the African experience. And Paula believes that representation and education are ways to attain racial justice. Virgilio Varela, yeah, you clap for her. You do that. Virgilio Varela has a vast experience working on capacity building in groups through collective and collaborative action. Examples are methodologies such as dragon dreaming, design and management of collaborative and sustainable projects, asset-based community development, design thinking. Varela is the father of 3 children who are his source of inspiration and remind him of his inner child that manifests itself through creativity and, you gave me this word, and serendipity. That. So our topic is mainly, as Ivan already said, is towards oneness, but we focused on a topic which is regenerative storytelling for racial justice. This is actually, I didn't know that I was doing this, as Ivan told you. I have a project called Afrolink, where I listen to stories about black people living in Portugal. No? In that sense, the sense of creating spaces where our reality turns into life. If we notice, even like the Bible, like even the Bible goes like, yeah, the word and everything just came into being. Stories like when we use abracadabra, the doors open up. So words make things into being. If our reality as black people is shown or represented with words in which we do not recognize ourselves, we almost reject ourselves as well. So when I created this space, Afrolink, it was with the intention of mirroring ourselves into those stories. And I think that this is also a bit of what regenerative storytelling is. Virgilio Varela, he's an expert in this methodology. Or at least you tagged it, you named it. I knew that I was doing something in that way, but I didn't have the words to say exactly what. And when I had access to his work, I was very happy to know that this is labelable, no? So, Virgilio, would you like to, tell us a bit more about this storytelling and why you think this is so important when facing not only racial justice, also tackling other types of traumas, but why would you think that that's also important?
Well, yeah, for me, storytelling gives meaning to our lives. It's the way we understand our day, because when we wake up, we create a story about what we would like to do. We also, when we go to sleep, we tell a story to ourselves about what we've done during the day. And if you go back to the ancient times, you will see that story is what people did when they had to tell about their day, or when men went hunting and came back, he had a story. When women stayed and took care of the community, for example, they also had a story. So for me, one magical place is the fire pit, because if you sit around the fire, it's the place where you share what you've learned. But also around the fire, you can dream. Dreams are also stories. You can plan things. Plans are stories. You can also celebrate things. And celebrations are stories, because when people ask, why are you celebrating? You tell a story. So stories is what give meaning to our lives. And if we put it in the context of today, we've just gone through a pandemic, for example. And each of us has a story about that experience, right? Mm-hmm. And the story about how we're coming out of that. So if you see, everybody had the same experience, but different stories. And the way we communicate with each other is through those stories. And for me, I've learned from griot people. Griot people are storytellers. They're people from Senegal and a good part of West Coast of Africa that are born storytellers. people that were born to tell the story about the village, to tell the story about what the king did, for example, to tell the story about a child that is born. So griot people, the storytellers in Africa, they were like living libraries, you know? So if, for example, I had a child, I would come to the griot person and tell the story about the child and tell the story about my family. He would then create a song about that. And the child, when the child is an adult or adolescent, he would come to the griot and ask about the story about his life or his family life. And the griot will sing the song. So as you can see, it's like weaved into our lives as human beings. It's the way we communicate. And going back to the topic about racial justice, for me it's key for any oppressed people to be able to retell a story. There's a story about the hunter, but there must be the story about the lion. There's a story about the oppressor who took away your life in the sense that took away your culture, took away your language, gave you a new name. That's what the oppressors do. They gave them a new name. They were reprogrammed, right? They were taken away from their village to a foreign country with a new name, with a new culture. Now you're John. And now this is your function in the world. Now this is what you can aspire to be. You see the power of that story? And you need to hone it. You need to find a place to go back to yourself and ask yourself, who am I really, really? And rename yourself and rename your possibilities and your purpose. So I know that a lot of slaves would hide in places to remember who they are, to go back to their seeds and to rename the possibility of who they can become and who their descendants can become. So that's the power of story for me.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Virgilio said something about the possibilities, no? That's something that I really believe in, that we have to show people the possibilities of being, you know, in this world. I think that your project, Afrolink, as well, no? She does interviews, but also it's like a newspaper,
Yes.
mostly directed to the Black community. But
Yes.
of course, it's for all of us. No, it also shows other possibilities. Can you talk about your Afrolink, but also the market? For instance, you have other projects where
Yes.
it's not only online, but it then materializes into other things where people really do put in practice these possibilities that they read about or they see videos about.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for being there. I was just listening to what Virgilio was said, and you before, Carla, because you were sharing your process with Afrolink, and mine is similar with Afrolink. The ability of being in the center of the story and to tell what we want to tell without other people always trying to shush you. Because that's what we feel a lot here in Portugal, and you name it, as Black people. When we are trying to share our vision, our perspectives, often the main narrative tries to dismiss our voices. And when I created Afrolink, first I created the book for children, because when I started, I have to begin with my own experience as a Black person in Portugal, because the regeneration, this regenerative storytelling, started with me, with myself, with my own history. When I started to share my history, my traumas, racial traumas, and others, I realized that this as a tremendous power, not only to allow me to recover my personal power, to understand some aspects of my life, something that went wrong. And at the time, back then, I was blaming myself for that. And after starting realize that we have a system, that we live in a system, that we are part of a society, I started to forgive myself. So when I realized that I was telling my story from a very negative point of view, I started to try to turn this and just pointing my attention to celebration. What can I celebrate? My accomplishments, my achievements. How can I bring this to my daily life? And I did this creating the book for children, because I was born in Mozambique, but I grew up in Portugal. So since I was a little child, I used to read a lot. I'm a reader. Even today, I'm still a reader. And I was lacking role models. All the books I read, they portrayed characters who were white. They were white. Heroes back then, only heroes. Now we have heroes. And then when I was reading, I was just feeling that I was not part of anything, because there was no one like me there. So the thing is that if I don't belong to this story, maybe it is because my story doesn't matter. And I started to internalize this thing. And only while sharing this with other black people, even with white people, but sharing, just finding a way to share this trauma, I started to realize that I have the power to make a difference in my life, but also to try to make a difference in other people's lives. It can be children, because when they are reading a book, when they have characters that resemble them, they feel they are part of the history, they feel they belong. That's what I was looking for when I was a child. I was looking for this sense of belonging. And now with Força Africana, I know, because I have some parents sharing the reactions of their kids with the characters, and they usually share with me that they feel really represented. They feel, oh, I'm like this, and I want to do, and I want to have this power, like this character. This kind of interaction, I think that it's really important while we are developing ourselves. With Afrolink, what I do is to listen. That's what I do. I challenge black people, black professionals, to tell their stories from their point of view. I'm not trying to build a narrative before starting our conversation. I just sit with this person and ask how it was for you to be a black person in Portugal, how it was to accomplish what you have accomplished. And I don't know, it was, I believe that at my third conversation, my interview, I had a woman saying to me that it was the first time she's from Cape Verde. She lives in Portugal for 40 years, I believe, and she was saying that it was the first time that she had the opportunity to tell about herself, just to tell her story, and how this was being regenerative in terms of understanding some aspects of her journey, and to celebrate, because as Virgilio said, I think that at the end it is all about celebration. Celebrate who we are, where we came from, and while doing that, being more directed, just trying to find new ways of building our stories. We are doing that as well with Afrolink Market, which is a market for Black entrepreneurs. I'm using some products,
items,
some customs from there. And one thing that I realized with Afrolink Market is that when we get together, we feel, this is immediate, we feel a sense of community. We relate with ourselves, we start sharing our journey, our challenges, and at the same way, we start finding a way of building new things together. So this is really powerful, and for me, this is regeneration.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think that you said something about.
Thank you.
You were talking about celebration. You both of you were talking about celebration, but I think we also need some time to mourn. You know, we don't really get, you know, the space to mourn.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that we also need a bit of that. I also started now that I was listening to you, I was
To
just,
honor our past, our ancestors. Yeah.
Because when I started Afrolink, I was also into that positive, let's celebrate, and you know, I was really into that, and I thought that was the thing. And after a few years, it wasn't really enough. I was lacking something.
But what do you mean about mourning? It's about bringing the bad.
Not bringing the bad. The last series that I even was talking about, I did a series about racial injustice. You know,
about the.
Then I did portraits about people that were killed for racial motivation. It didn't have to be police brutality. It could be just a mob. Could be a mob that spanked a guy because he was black, because the guy was gypsy, whatever. So we don't get the time to mourn. We get the time to go out on the street and say Black Lives Matter and this and that, or try to celebrate something. But we have to. I think that we have to have a period where we just still.
Yeah.
And we recognize that something is going on, and we have to be allowed to cry about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like to, and really our stories should be as well. You know, this sharing is really something super important. I remember
I do a lot of cry while sharing. It's true. But it's not the same thing.
But I read something about an interview with you. I think it was an interview where you said something like, "I don't share my traumas for fun."
Yeah.
And you may not realize, but this sort of conversation, these are very tough conversations. This is like we're just like spilling our traumas, you know, in front of lots of people that. No, and I really liked that you said that, you know,
because it's painful
in that context. Yeah,
it's painful to confront.
Yeah, because sometimes people just think that, oh, these guys are strong, they're so, you know, innovative, they're doing these projects and stuff like that. But sometimes we don't take the time to say, look, this is something else, no?
Yeah.
When we talk about this regenerative storytelling, and of course celebration, it has a part, but I think that like the different perspectives, the different aspects of the sharing have to be taken in account. Because, for instance, you said, I listen. I love that.
Yeah.
Because we go like, oh, let's do storytelling, but are people willing to listen? You know, are people listening? Are we creating spaces? You created this. I feel that I created a space for those stories to be listened to. I think that Afrolink is also a space where those stories will be listened to. I think that the Liminal Village as a principle is a space where these stories are going to be listened to, you know? So this is the thing that I think that we also have to think about, creating more storytelling, the process of storytelling, but also having in mind that we have to create more spaces where these stories will be heard.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that.
Sorry.
For me, the concept of emotions have been hijacked somehow. You know, the society tells us a story about what emotions are good and what emotions are not good, what you should do and what you should not do. So you should be upbeat, happy, strong, never fall down and cry. And these things are in our unconscious. So whenever we feel to mourn, we are ashamed. We feel like we're doing something wrong. And for me, regenerative is about resignifying emotions, for example. So fear has a purpose. Pain has a purpose. You will never understand someone if you don't feel the pain of that person. If you're only happy and you only have happy moments with that person, you don't see the whole person, because he or she will probably go back and hide to cry alone, because it's not good to cry in public. And we need to reclaim those spaces to be ourselves and to be able to cry whenever we need, to be able to say I'm afraid whenever we are afraid, and feel that all those emotions are in service of something bigger. It's you understanding yourself better. So they are there for you to use them. So I wouldn't say go through life with just considering happy feelings and all the good things and ignoring the space for mourning of to say or to say you're afraid of something. And I think we're all going through a collective trauma. We need to acknowledge that. It's not some people, it's all of us going through it. Even if you're not from a minority, whenever you see injustice, man, you feel it inside yourself. You cannot go through that and say, it's like nothing. So those emotions are there for a purpose, to remind you of your humanity, of your greatness. So for me, whenever I looked into spaces, I think for me that the space should be for emotions mainly, to come, to be manifested as your true being. So a space for mourning doesn't have to be a lonely space. That's what I mean. A space for mourning can be a collective space of us looking at things and say, we're going to this together. It's shitty, but we're here. And I see you, and you see me as I am in my entirety. So when I created regenerative storytelling, was during the pandemic, where people were really afraid to talk about what they're going through, afraid of talking about emotions. We were all going through the same stuff, suffering the same things, but none of us wanted to admit it. So I created that space for us to talk about the stories that we tell about ourselves, the stories that we say, we're not good enough, we're not able, right? The stories that we create about other people. You know, how many stories did we create about our neighbors? They're not careful enough, they're not wearing the mask, you know, those stories. The stories that we tell about the world, how we think the world works. And you see all these conspiracy theories going through. You know, they made it, it's not a real disease, it's fake. And all those stories about the world. And the stories that we tell about the future. Some of us said we're doomed. There's no way out. This is the end, right? And some others said, no, maybe there's a possibility. I'll find a country where, you know, things are free and I don't need to wear a mask. So all of these things are going through our heads. But we're suffering together in this. And I think what you said is so critical. Storytelling is about healing. It's about us going forward and say, this is what's going on with me. And healing, it's about somebody listening to you without giving you advice or judgment. That's the deeper healing for me, is being able to be witness in your pain, in your suffering, in your entirety as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said something that really gave me a hint to what this oneness, this walk towards oneness might look like, like it's something like recognizing that we are all going through the same shit. But we have different forms of dealing with it, different ways of dealing with it. And the sharing of these different ways can also can really show us that we are one. We only have particular ways of dealing with the sameness of all that. How would we put that in practice, thinking about racial justice in the racial aspect term, into racial terms? How could we try to tackle or make it tangible for people, that this is one of the possibilities, to walk towards oneness?
I believe that it's not easy, because the thing about listening, it's about just understanding that your truth is not the only truth that exists around. And sometimes it's difficult for other people to recognize these aspects. While having tough conversations about racism, one thing that I think that it's common, it's this difficulty to be listened. So I think that this verb, this action, it's really important in this process, because you can have you can resignificate your emotions, like Virgilio was saying, and I'm doing a lot myself. But if you don't get to be listened, you get stuck there. Okay, I'm doing my process, but I'm trying to do something bigger. I'm trying to provoke change, but I can't do it on my own. I need a collective action, or a collective conscious about this process. And I think that it's really powerful, of course, that we can own the narrative and that we can retell our stories, but we are doing this with a purpose. My purpose is to fight racism, to fight for, to fight against all kinds of discrimination at the end of the day, because we have a lot of other dimensions as human beings. I'm not just a black person, I'm also a woman, and I have other dimensions of my being, my self-being. So I think that a knowledge that we are all connected, that we have these intersections, each of us, is important to start listening and to understand that sometimes the other person, I don't like to say it, I don't know if there is an expression in English for lugar de fala.
No, já não me lembro.
Yes, because it's the
standing point. I think that it was translated by
standing point, but it's yeah, but I don't think that it describes the process, because this is the conscious that I think that we should have, that the people, the person who is living the trauma directly, of course, that his voice, her voice, is more important than mine. That okay, I can tell that you are suffering, I can relate with that, but I am not living that context. So I have to recognize this and just to sit and try to understand the other point of view. That's what I think that I am trying to do, trying to create this this dialogue, because I think that it's missing, this dialogue. Sometimes I feel that I'm just speaking alone, that nobody is listening, even if someone is just staring at me, just if he is listening, but it is not, because at the end of the day, the person is going to do what the person feels like she should do. I usually get this idea when I get from the other side this explanation that I didn't want to hurt you, to hurt your feelings. Okay, I understand that, but the impact of your action was that you hurt my feelings. So what are you going to do after realizing that? You are going to change your behavior, or you are going to do the same thing that you are used to do because you think you're a good person and you had not the intention to hurt me. So this is a thing that I'm always trying to bring to the table while having these discussions about social justice, about fighting racism and other forms of discrimination.
Yeah. What about you, Virgilio? How do you think that this walk towards oneness might look like?
I think it's important to have utopia, like a better place for humanity, a desirable future. And for me, imagination plays a big role in this. The possibility of imagine a better way of living, better communities. And we've seen in the last, I don't know, decade, people creating intentional communities. It's part of that thinking. Like, you know, the city is not serving my purpose anymore, and I want to go somewhere else, and I think somewhere else is better. So I think utopias are important, and the idea of oneness, I think, connects to this idea of utopia, that we need to imagine a better humanity. And it plays like an utopian vision, but also it's already happening kind of thing. Because when you see we are all human beings, we are all, we all need to breathe, we all depend on each other, we realize this with the pandemic. And so we have these similarities, but at the same time we are diverse. We have different perspectives of life, we have different cultures. But the attainment of oneness, it requires us to recognize the system that is operating on us right now. And it's a system of separation, guys. It's a system that creates us and them, winners and losers, the ones who have, the ones who have not, women, men, intelligent, non-intelligent. That's the system that is operating right now. So the first step for me is to acknowledge that before you even go to that place of oneness, is to recognize where we are right now, and it's a shitty place, and we need to kind of use that to say, I don't want that, that does not serve, and then move towards that idea of oneness. For me, the idea of separation implies the idea of power, and we cannot talk about racial justice without talking about, injustice towards nature. This is all connected, guys. We cannot just separate and say it's only the racial question when we're doing all this stuff to nature. And power is embedded in this thinking. The idea that human beings have power over nature. But then when you go to a microcosmos, some human beings have power over others. You see, power is always present there. And together with the idea of power is privilege. Right? Some people have privilege that others don't have. And when you realize the access that you have to water, to enter a building without the police following you, right? To be able to shop without people think you're a suspect, to be able to walk in the street without being stopped and searched, all this stuff are privilege. And you can either look away and say, well, that's the way life is, the way world is, I'm going to use it. Or you can use your privilege to lift others, to fight the system, to fight the injustice, to join the ones who are suffering and say, we can change this. Patriarchy is not serving us. This kind of thinking, for me, is regenerative. This is the kind of revolution that you can do yourself, by yourself, and we can do it even more together. So oneness is this thinking that we are all humans and we can shift things together.
Yeah. I was thinking about this, what you just said, how difference is made something that is not good, you know, but in difference, in recognizing the differences, we can make the bigger picture, no?
Yeah.
I was remembering my process with when I started doing, I think that you have that a lot as well. Slipping here. I think that you have that a lot as well. Why did you create a project just, you know, focused on black people?
This is racism.
This is racism.
Yes.
You are separating people. No? And I got that a lot. And then I was like, no, I'm strengthening, giving strength to a community so that this community can then walk into the oneness of the human community, no? Because I think that's very necessary to create new spaces where the so-called difference is strengthened, where this so-called difference can feel that it is important, that it matters, so that we can then function as a unit, knowing that each one of us has a super important part, essential part in the walk of the human community life. So I really like it. He's great. He's giving me like very good insights about the process that I went through before. I would like to go to a bit specific a place, which is Portugal. And what would you like, because we were talking about utopias and stuff, what would you like to see happening in this racial justice chapter of
Oh, so many
Portugal?
things.
just two. Okay, so many. I'll limit it. I'll limit you. Give me two things that you think they're more important.
When you were introducing my bio, you were saying you were talking about education.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, education is key. You have to start with that because the way we teach our curricula in Portuguese school is racist.
What about it is racist? So that because I think most of the people
especially when you are talking about history, you have a romanticized. This is when we are talking about the Portuguese past. You never acknowledge that Portuguese people created slavery as we understand as the transatlantic slave of people. This is not the dominant narrative. And you are still saying that enslaved people are goods. They are treated like goods. So Portugal used to change gold and slaves. So for the black kids who are learning, they are learning that they are goods, that they are not persons. And this is something that the black movement already stated and is trying to change this narrative. But I don't know for how long we are having this discussion, but at least 10, 15 years.
Okay, so you're saying that school books should be changed?
School books, yes, but not only school books, even the representation, the role models. I don't know if you had a black teacher.
I saw one black teacher. I wanted her, but she wasn't my teacher.
I don't have this experience.
But I saw one, yeah.
But I think this is really important. So that Virgilio was talking about imagination. This is really important, so that you feel that you can be everything you want to be, anything. And this is not a possibility when you are growing up without role models, without black role models, without role models that resemble you. And I was this child a few years ago, and while thinking about how I was a child and what I wanted to be back then, I realized that I was cutting some options. I was doing that for, I don't know. I think that, to be honest, only recently, 5, 6 years ago, I realized that I have this power to resignificate my own history, to do whatever I want to do or whatever I decide to do. But this was really difficult to achieve. So I think that if I had a chance to learn from black people and to learn about my own history as a black person, because when we are talking about the liberation, the freedom in Portugal, we forgot to tell about how African people, how African struggles were decisive for this to happen. Because we have freedom in Portugal because black people were dying there to fight for it.
Oh, 25 de Abril.
Yes.
The 25th of April.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's strange to say it in English. 25 de Abril. Yeah. So I only got the chance to address this chapter of our history after understanding who Amílcar Cabral was. We have a lot of important men of our history. This is also Portuguese history. And you only know about Amílcar Cabral because you have to do a lot of church research. You have to dig deep to find Amílcar Cabral, to find, I'm from Mozambique, to find Samora Machel. It's not easy. It's not easy to find this kind of information because it's not there. So even this access to information, it's something that we have to think about. How it's so difficult to have access to our history. And that's why also I'm creating Afrolink and this kind of projects, because I think that it's really important. Virgilio was talking about the tradition of griots. We have this in Africa. We tell our histories like that, oral history. But what is recognized as a document is what is printed. And we need to start recovering these aspects of our history. I think it's really important. I'm doing this even with my personal history, because even my ancestors, I don't know their history. I don't know. Because this thing about talking, about sharing, this is not present. This was not present in my family. Because it's painful. Yeah. There are very painful memories, so we tend to not look to. And I think it's important to look. I was telling about education because I think it's really important. And here in Portugal, I think it's really important as well to collect ethnic data. Because we don't know how many black Portuguese we have here. So it's really difficult to fight inequality based on ethnic and racial. If you don't have something that it's there, numbers, as we have with the gender discussion, only because we have numbers, we have figures, we can say, look, you can't deny this. This is real, this is happening. So what we are going to do about it? And this is something that we cannot do in Portugal. So we are always trying to raise awareness about racism and about inequalities, but we lack this objective information. And what I feel is that we are always, the system is always trying to say that this is from your point of view as a black person, but this is not happening. This is not real. So we have to make it real. And we can make it real with this collection.
Okay, thank you. What about you? What would you say that it has to happen in terms of, in Portugal, you know, for us to tackle this question of racial justice?
I think for me, it's the responsibility that should be shared with everybody to fight it. It should not be for the people who are oppressed to do something about it. It should be a collective effort, because otherwise we're perpetuating the same thing. Someone is fighting for something and somebody is not allowing them to have access to that something. And it's, for me, the first thing is to acknowledge that this system is not serving well humanity. And for some people is really, I want to go back to this idea of mourning things, because it's not only the oppressed that needs to mourn. Oppressors also need to understand that they have emotions and they need to mourn. And maybe it's generational. You know, the idea of, you know, we don't feel it, we don't care. It's impossible. We are humans. So collective mourning. There's a system called restorative justice. I don't know if you heard about it. But what they do is bringing together the victims and the perpetrators. And I think this kind of work should be done in terms of racial justice as well, because we all have something to say to each other. It cannot be one way, one-sided. It needs to be together. So I would invite maybe a new word, which is conversation. You need to talk and act. You cannot just talk about things and say, that's it, well, that's where we are, yeah, tough, let's continue. You need to act. And I want this idea of responsibility to mean that you are able to respond and able to act in a world that is unfair and unjust. Because maybe things will shift in a way that you are the victim in the future, or your children are the victim in a different context. So we need to fight it for everybody and for the future. So in Portugal, in particular, is not only to have these conversations in schools with children, is to really to reawaken in them the power of possibilities, of they could be the next president, the idea of they could be the next prime minister, the idea that they could be the next teacher in the school. This possibility needs to be there for them, but not as a possibility of imagination. They have to see more examples of people doing it. We today on this stage, we are representing possibilities for people, for children, for future generations. And me challenging you here, it's a big possibility again. As you can see, we're having this conversation, and I look forward for your questions as well. But we're having this conversation and looking at the pain together. It's not one side. And I think children should be able to have this possibility of looking together to the pain and look together to the possibilities. So representing possibilities is one thing. For me, the other thing is responsibility, ownership for the shit. Mm-hmm. You know, there are no saints in the story. We need to own it, to then transgress it, to become something new, to regenerate. So in Portugal, I say not only in educational settings, but I would go to the government. Why not the parliament? And have these conversations there too, and challenge the policymakers and say, what are you doing about it? You know, it's shitty for everyone. So it's not one-sided, it's not one place, it needs to be systemic, because racism and racial injustice is systemic, guys. It's everywhere in the system. And the way to fight it is to think systematically, to think together, to look at the whole system and bring everybody to see that they have agency, that they can do something about it too. I have been to schools talking to children about this, and they say, Virgilio, you're right. And it stops there, guys. It stops there. So I need this action side of things. There can be projects, there can be people doing things, creating networks, creating podcasts, and creating alternatives, so people can really feel it, that this is a collective action, that it's not one-sided.
Virgilio, I would like to ask, which schools were there? Were these schools that you are talking about? They were from black neighborhoods?
Yes, they were.
That's one of the problems as well.
Again,
Yes.
that's why it needs to be systemic. I need to be invited to the most posh school in Portugal
Of course.
and say these things.
Yes.
Because it needs
Yeah.
to be said. We cannot think that the world is fluffy. And when you look at the posh school, it's gated. You know, it's closed from the rest of the world. There's a pathway. People don't have to see the bad things. And then they go inside the school and say, finally, I can breathe. But it's not about that. The world does not work like that, right? So I need to be there. You need to be there too, because we planted a seed on you too. So go. And in your place, say, I know this is not fair. I know I can say something about this. So I want to put this virus on you too.
Yeah, so Virgilio already gave us the hint that we would like you also to participate if you want to share or ask something, comment on one or the other topic that we've raised here. So this is the time to do it. If you just want to say hello, you can. You know, it's a time where you can really like get in touch with us and exchange.
Hello. I love it. Hello.
Yeah, it's this influence of my children. They're always saying hello.
Olá.
Olá.
So I'm Portuguese, and
I don't
it's
see
very
you. Oh.
here. It's just sometimes it's just right in front of you. It's very rare that we have an all-black panel discussing racial justice, and I think one of the things to change in Portugal is exactly that. I was even part of a political party that fights racism, and this is not the reality. So thank you so much for being here. It's been really interesting, and about the history and how we learn at school, it is challenging as a white Portuguese too, because there's a lot of things that I had to learn as an adult already, because I had this idea about the world, and I realized that the world is quite different, and the country that was presented to me and the life that I live is not a reality for all the people that are Portuguese as well and live in the same country under the same law. And the data collection, it's actually one of the struggles was the constitution, which is very ironic, because the constitution is not protecting you, because everyone agree, or most of I think the movement agrees that it's important. And this is comment about you say, but kind of what I would like to hear from you is how love enters all in this conversation, because I feel personally that this has been a journey to learn how to love other humans. And I actually had a black teacher in school, but it didn't mean anything for me at the time, you know. And it meant as a teacher, because it was one of the greatest that I had, and it was Diretor Turma, so the one in charge of the class. But how do you feel about this willing to take part of the action, being grounded in love, in like caring about the others and humanizing? Because I think in this way that we address colonization in Portugal, it's very dehumanizing. We don't give a proper, we don't problematize what we have done to people, to whom, like the ones that we are living now with, those were their ancestors. So I would just like your comment on this. I hope this was good. Thank you again.
Love.
I think that like I love love. It's one of my favorite things, and I think it starts by you have to love yourself. No, you have to love this cliche, but you have to love yourself. And with the Black community, we have to do a lot of work to get to that self-love, because there are no stories around there that tell us that we are lovable. They don't teach us how to love. You know, that we don't have like many movies where we see a black family where the parent arrives and hugs the kid, and this. No, the parent is always alcoholic. The mother is being hit. So nobody's telling stories about how we love, or how the possibilities for us to love. So but love is like really starting by loving yourself. In what you commented, I think that learning your history, it was painful for you to realize that your history was a lie, you know? So it was painful for you to enter in that. And love is about humanizing yourself, realizing your humanity. And realizing your humanity also implies looking at the history of your country, mourning that history, and realizing that we were oppressors. I am part of this. This is so hard for you to go home and love yourself afterwards, you know? It's like us. We also think that, oh, I was a slave and this is so bad. And we miss out opportunities to love our children. We are so worried about what racism did to us that we don't have time to love ourselves and love our own. We have time to undo this lies, you know? And these lies are very negative. You have to do the other way around, where the lies are super, you know, like protective and take you here. And then you have to do this work and realize this is also a process. And I think that has a lot to do with love and humanizing ourselves. One of the worst images that I keep in my mind, it's like in the
Protests?
No, the protests, the black civil rights movement in the U.S., where black people carry cards, you know, like charts, I don't know, saying I am human.
Yeah.
What? You have to write
Yeah.
on a piece of paper that you are human. You have to tell people that you are human. And really, this, like, humanizing this or that, this is very, very dangerous. I think it's humanizing this or that, you know, like, we are human. Punkt. This is no discussion about that, you know, just love. It's just like, it just, yeah. True.
Is it me?
It's everyone, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I would need 2 hours, guys, to talk about
To
this.
talk about love, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally understand you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
But I would
thank
say
you.
this. I see love as the ultimate word for this idea of oneness. But also I see it as a possibility of integrating part of ourselves that has been dismembered, that has been broken. So for me, love is to recognize the many dimensions of myself, even the ones that I don't like or feel people don't appreciate. So to love is really regenerative because it's acknowledge everything about yourself. And by doing that, you are opening the space to acknowledge everything about the diversity of human beings.
Yeah.
You are recognizing that we are one. So love brings you this because love has this element of care. And when you care about something, you nurture it, you want to keep it safe. Same thing as nature. When you care about all human beings, all human cultures, you will take care of it, right? You want to preserve it. You want it to flourish. You want it to be alive, mainly. So it's the potent thing to make you feel truly alive as a human being is the ability to integrate the difficult parts of yourself and say, I still love me as I am. Well, I still love me even though I'm biased to things, towards things. I still love me even though I know sometimes I'm prejudiced towards things. By acknowledging those parts that inhabit all of us. We all do it. By acknowledging that that's the human experience. That's the most profound way of loving yourself. But it's expandable because you can acknowledge the suffering of the other. You can recognize the suffering of the other through love. You can celebrate the other person because of love. But it's necessary, as you said, that we bring love to this context of possibility of strengthening the human experience, and not love as sex, for example, that is often mistaken. So in some spaces when we talk about love, people go, ooh, love. Well, you're going somewhere else, but you're not going to the place. Because love is integrating suffering, it's integrating the painful parts of yourself, and acknowledging as this is valid, this is real, and this is important. So I think love is potent in that way.
This is it. Queres comentar?
I just want to add that from a perspective point of view, that I had to accept that I wasn't in love with myself when I was a child and even when I was a teenager, because all my skin color, my hair, my image was not an image perceived as beautiful in Portugal. So I internalized this idea that I was not beautiful, and I had to shift this image that I had. I am always doing this with other things because trying to heal many traumas is not easy. It's not from a day to another. And I would like to add as well a quote from Mamadou Ba. Mamadou Ba is an activist, an anti-racist activist. And he said when he won a prize last year for fighting for human rights, that being an anti-racist is an act of love for humanity. And I believe in this. So I think that being an activist is being in love, is an act of love. Even if you are fighting racism, if you are fighting LGBTQI phobia, whatever, you are claiming love for everyone. So I think that you cannot fight the fight without the love.
I think that was a beautiful question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And she's busted because there's some influence. There's bell hooks here all about love.
Yeah, to bell hooks.
She helped me a lot in this process, yeah. And she still does, so.
And it might then not be a coincidence that policymaking has, and the language around policymaking leaves no space for words like love. Those are, that's left for poetry, not policy. So there's no room for it. And care has only recently been discussed because it can become a part of the care economy. If there is, if we can care about workers, they will be better workers. That is why we will care for them. That's the only incentive. Care on the basis of care, that has no value. Only if it can be translated into economic benefit. So that's also an entry point I think we need to try to dismantle.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking today. It's really awesome to hear your perspectives on everything. I grew up in the UK, but I've lived in the US for the last 10 to 12 years. And I have to say the kind of normalization of storytelling in relation to racial justice is so much more prominent in the US than it has been for me in my UK experiences. And I was wondering if you guys see kind of a hierarchy in terms of how certain black stories are considered and believed more than other ones, particularly in Europe. I've had exchange with white Europeans who don't even believe that racism exists here and only think it exists in the US. And I think the US is often used as a scapegoat for racism in the rest of the world. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that. And again, thanks again for your perspective.
Thank you for the question. Should I go?
Yes, you can go.
No, I think you're right, because, for instance, for us in Portugal, we have a big influence from Brazil. So we know that racism exists in Brazil. There's people are getting killed by three. I think that one black young person is killed every 21 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's like, okay, we believe that exists in Brazil. But our stories here, and they really tell us this. You think you're in Brazil? You think this is the U.S.? So I think that's pretty much a reality for us too. There's this hierarchization of what is and what is not.
Yes, so that's the importance of the data collection there, because people can't deny when you have numbers, but they are still doing that in Portugal. You even have political leaders saying that there is no racism in Portugal. So what can you do from that point? Yeah, it's difficult. It's really difficult. Yeah.
Whoa, yeah. Well, the US and the UK have different settlement stories and migrant stories, and that reflects. When I lived in the UK, in London, I was so surprised by the Jamaicans. If you meet a Jamaican in the UK, you will know what is someone that is proud of himself or where he's coming from and takes no bullshit. Takes no bullshit. And there are some countries in Africa that people, even though they are very small, they look at you, if you are taller, as if you are small. It's brilliant. They look at you like this. And you go like, okay, sorry. So there are parts of Africa that have this sense of pride, of power, of agency. That's one of the words I love. That you will never take that away. There's no way, right? So with other people from different parts of Africa, there's different ways of relating. There's different ways of being. And sometimes even accepting things as they are. Like, you know, yeah, that's the way it is. So you see the difference, the way people react. So that reflects in activism, that reflects in community centers, associations, leadership, and all this stuff. That's a reflection of that. So it's really interesting to know that Barack Obama, for example, was a community organizer. And he says this as a very natural, and yeah, that's what I did. But in Portugal, you don't have that many people saying that. Or even in the UK, people don't take that much pride of, you know, being a community organizer. So all these different ways of looking at things influence the way communities behave and people behave. So I agree with you. We take a look at Brazil and we say, well, yeah, that's the racism. But yeah, it's happening nearby all over Europe. You see that happening, and in Portugal we see that happening as well. But I think the process of owning the story and telling the story is slower in some parts than others. You know, blogging is such a powerful thing. You know, there was a story. Let me just tell you this. There was something that happened in a slum called Cova da Moura, right? And a group of young people went to the police squad to complain about something, right? And the police immediately interpreted that act as invasion of the squad. So they were arrested, they were beaten. The television, the first channel, I don't know which one arrived first, maybe TVE or one of them, just said a group of young black men invaded the squad and, you know, hurt all the police, and then that's why they're arrested. A young man inside the slum wrote a blog telling the true story, bringing the context, what happened. And suddenly you see the power shift. Before you had the news, but now you have a blogger. What happened? BBC went after that story, the blogger story, and came to Portugal and said, hey, what really happened was this, right? And then the channel had to apologize for what they said. You see the power of this? And it's coming slowly. People are kind of going to places with their mobile phones. I've seen all over the internet. and police are stopping and searching, and someone is filming and asking, what are you doing? Did you read the rights, and did you do this? So this is all coming together now, but if you go back 50 years ago or 30 years ago, nobody would ever confront a policeman. So different places have different weapons, but through internet, through all this access to information, people are starting to know that they have agency, they have power, they can stop things, they can retell stories, and it's being shared. So just the fact that you came here and share that, for us is brilliant, because you're opening the possibility of, in the UK, even though we think it's a very developed country, there are still issues to be, taking into account.
So there's a hand behind you. Oh, in front of you.
And I would just add, since there's a lot of active prejudice and racism being channeled by people in power, there's also a lot of passive racism and prejudice happening amongst everybody else. Mm-hmm. And this stage of interconnected communication and decentralized communication, where anybody can write a story and put it up there and then have it be researched and have another story disproven, means that ignorance is no longer an excuse for your prejudice. Mm. So you can't go, I didn't know. Oh, here's a research study where HR people are racially biased against applicants. Yeah. You have somebody walk in and they get not chosen for a job purely because of the color of their skin. Yeah. Not because of merit or CV. Yeah. So once this research is able to come out adequately, you become responsible. Yeah. You are accountable for your actions. That's what's changing.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Juliana, and thank you so much for bringing this topic, and also about the importance of storytelling and also restorative justice. And this reminds me of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and the important work that happened in South Africa. And one of the things that Mandela was for was to oneness, like believing that there was only one country and not division between them. And my question is, since, and having this as a departure point, since there is only one race, how beneficial is it to talk about racial justice or racial injustice and not embracing, let's say, the cup half empty and towards, let's say, the cup half full? And I believe in the weight of words, and you also mentioned that. So do you believe there's a possibility of maybe changing words so we can go towards that oneness that we all aim for? Thank you.
In this case, I don't think so, because we have to talk about race, we have to use this word, because this is a social construction. We are talking about this, about racial justice, about fighting racism, because there was a system that classified, we still have this system, but back then you had the science supporting this system, saying that they were people who were inferior and people who were superior. So when you came from there, to address the problem, you have to use the words. You cannot avoid to use. How are you going to fight racism if we are not talking about this social construction? I don't see it possible, from my point of view, at least.
I could go on and on that. But I would maybe put a scenario. You and I, knowing the system that we live in, knowing that the system is prejudiced against, let's say, black men. You and I apply for a job. We are both qualified. We are both able. And the assessor sees the CVs and sees a black man and says, uh-oh, we don't have black people in our organization, so I don't think this is a good fit. And you go. I cannot go back to that story of we are all one and it's all fair, because the unfairness is there in practice. It's in front of me. What I need to change is the system where I'm in, to acknowledge that it's wrong, and then we can think about how can we rebuild that oneness that you're talking about, that sameness that we're talking about. Because we're coming from a different starting point. Maybe if we are in a different country, the context will change. But if we are here, first we need to acknowledge that something is wrong, something is stinky. And we can see it in practical terms. In practical terms. So a lot of countries have quotas, for example. You know what that means? That means that we acknowledge that minority groups don't have access, and we are creating a quota. We are creating an X number of places for these people to have access to this school, to this system, to this university. So there you can see something is broken. And we cannot say, well, at least we have quotas. When we will get there? When will I get to the place where my children, because they are black children, will just walk freely into your university without somebody saying, oh, she's black, it's going to be trouble, she cannot apply for this job, she cannot go into this university. And there are places that this still happen. So we cannot just say, let's go to oneness before acknowledging that something is broken and is wrong. I wish I could go now, but we need to fix something. At least I feel I need to fix something for the betterment of humanity.
So there's time for one more comment or question. And however, our speakers will be around a little bit for if you want to do some stuff one-on-one afterwards during the break.
Hello. Thank you so much. Really, it's like, I mean, I can just understand how hard it is also to take the audience and to speak about, so as you mentioned at the beginning, traumas, and to explain your stories. So thank you so much for doing this. I just wanted to go back to, sorry for the names, I can't remember your name, but you in the middle, you said...
Carla.
Sorry?
Carla.
Carla, okay, thank you. So you said, Carla, at the beginning of the session, you mentioned that it was important to mourn also. So there's this moment of activism and this moment that we should take also to mourn. I agree with you, and I really felt it when George Floyd has been murdered. To me, as I lived it, well, first of all, it was COVID period, so, well, terrible. But, well, this murder has been shown on the TV and social media, and although I tried to avoid looking at it, it just kept on coming and coming and coming constantly, up until the moment that I realized that I was feeling so bad, I didn't really I couldn't really put a word on it, because, well, black people get killed every day all over the globe. I mean, but I had all those racism experience that just came back to my face, and I realized that I wasn't the only one. My cousin lived the same, my friend lived the same, and we were just, all of us, COVID period, in our own zone at home. And then I just saw like one person talking about it, then somebody else sharing it, and someone else, and we were all mourning sorry for my pronunciation, but mourning grieving at the same time, processing our own racial experience also. But then this also led to come back stronger and manifest some days later, because this movement that happened 2 years ago and still happening, but, well, it's kind of, it's less stronger than it was, unfortunately, but it was incredible. it was incredible to see so many people in the streets all over the globe. Like, my voice is, I'm almost crying because it was just insane, and this gave us so much strength. And yeah, I just think there is a moment to grieve, and once this has passed, you can come back to activism, and then go back to, go back to your space, get some strength back also, because it's a lot of given energy and taking energy. And I just think I see this more as a circle, and it's just, something that just comes up and down. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that these two parts, activism and grieving, to me are just part of one whole thing, and they're really connected. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. We totally agree on that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you, really. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, this is how you do conversation, which I will be definitely using. So also thanks for highlighting the importance of listening in a storytelling session, because it does often feel like the first question should be, is anyone listening? Because there are stories to be told, but if the listening's not there, then what is the point? It's actually quite a defeatist position to be in, to be asked to tell something, but then you actually meet a closed door. And I would want to add one thing as well, because Carla and I have been working in another capacity now, collaborating on a project that channels resources like money into communities that don't have access to them. Because yeah, great, do activism on top of being oppressed, on top of being exhausted, on top of being traumatized, and then do some political activism, because you got to fight for your rights. And one key obstacle is, resources, money. People have to live, just humbly, to have a little bit of capacity and space to do this kind of organizing work. So already Carla found a group called Casate that gives space in Portugal for trans people from either migrant or racialized communities. And because there's no door, it's like double prejudice for these communities. And so she made the first grant happen, basically.
Wow.
A couple of weeks ago. So
congrats.
More of this.
It's really important.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.